We can fix this. Move.
Welcome back to another episode of Cover to Cover, the series where we give you a bunch of great new books to read after watching your favourite TV show. This time around, we're looking at the new HBO series, The Last of Us. Based on the popular PlayStation game of the same name, The Last of Us sees grieving father Joel team up with 14 turning 40-year-old Ellie for a good old-fashioned USA road trip filled with mutated zombies, fungal infections, and post-apocalyptic misery. The series is a dystopic tear-jerker with just enough breathing room from its game world counterpart to forge its own unique identity. So whether you're just headed out on the road or nearing its end, here's 5 books to read after watching The Last of Us. Released to critical acclaim in 2006, Cormac McCarthy's The Road follows an unnamed father and his boy as they make their way through an ashen post-apocalypse in search of safe harbour. There are no clickers or bloaters on this road, just the heavy toil of daily survival, the constant search for food, avoiding roaming bands of cannibals, and dealing with a hostile and indifferent environment. Here's an excerpt, quote, "He walked out in the grey light and stood, and he saw for a brief moment the absolute truth of the world, the cold, relentless circling of the interstate earth, darkness implacable, the blind dogs of the sun in their running, the crushing black vacuum of the universe, and somewhere 2 hunted animals trembling like ground foxes in their cover. Borrowed time and borrowed world and borrowed eyes with which to sorrow it." End quote. McCarthy's prose often reads a little bit like a scavenger's inventory stock take, but it's consistently poetic, moving, and utterly depressing. The Road is a powerful examination of the bonds of fatherhood and the difficult moral choices people sometimes make in order to survive. In Nevil Shute's On the Beach, the residents of the coastal Australian town of Melbourne, my hometown, await the end of days as a deadly radiation cloud slowly moves across the earth towards them. First published as a periodical in the 1950s, On the Beach is a melancholic study of the struggle to find life's meaning when faced with an inevitable and catastrophic end. The citizens of Shute's Melbourne know their fate all too well, and hence their driving purpose is not your typical how to save the world, but how to make sense of the time left. It is both a touching story of human connection and a timely reminder of the fragility of the earth in uncertain times. The Guardian said of it in their recent retrospective, quote, "As a microcosm of 1950s Australian paranoia and inadequacy, On the Beach is a dynamite isolation read. It offers a hellish vision of an alternative Melbourne, one where every citizen eventually finds themselves staring at a handful of cyanide pills." End quote. The World Without Us explores a future without humans in a blow-by-blow post-apocalyptic thought experiment. How would our houses rot, our bridges collapse, our highways buckle and split? What fauna would perish and what would thrive when every parking lot turns to pasture and humans aren't around to trim the edging? Last of Us creative director Neil Druckmann referenced Weisman's book during the making of the original PlayStation game, using its thoroughly researched systems of decay and regrowth to inform the bedrock of the game's post-apocalyptic landscape. The book is a work of non-fiction, so the descriptions don't leap off the page with the suspense or emotional nuance of the TV series. But the work itself remains actually an entirely fascinating read as a blank slate simulator for a world without us. Here's an excerpt. Quote, "The lesson of every extinction, says the Smithsonian's Doug Irwin, is that we can't predict what the world will be 5 million years later by looking at the survivors. Let's face it, who would have predicted the existence of turtles? Who would have ever imagined that an organism would essentially turn itself inside out, pulling its shoulder girdle inside its ribs to form a carapace. The only real prediction you can make is that life will go on and that it will be interesting. End quote.
General direction? Head southeast till you hit I-25. It's right off the interstate. Should be hard to miss.
The classic moral highway of a good Western has plenty in common with post-apocalyptic fiction. Hence, it's no large leap to step from the world of Joel and Ellie to the plains of 19th century Texas with Paulette Jiles' 2016 novel, News of the World. Jiles' tale sees a retired Confederate soldier, Captain Kidd, chaperoning a young orphan girl, Joanna, back to her family after being kidnapped by Kiowa Indians. Kidd is a jaded yet charismatic travelling newsreader, and Joanna, a traumatised child just relearning who to trust after being taken from one family and now taken from another. Through Giles' economical yet beautiful prose, the two begin to bond on their dangerous journey south, reminding us of the potential for people from very different worlds to grow closer in the face of a harsh and uncaring world. The Washington Post said in their review, quote, "The evil some people are capable of is never as important in Giles' assessment as the longing of many more people for peace, order and love. Her lovely and tender novel affirms that the news of the world can be good if we strive together to make it so." End quote. Of course, it wouldn't be quite apocalyptic of us if we didn't end on a more somber note. And what better finisher than Jose Saramago's 1995 novel, Blindness. The story opens in a traffic jam. A man waits for the lights to change, only to discover his vision suddenly turns a blinding white. He is the victim of a plague of blindness that quickly sweeps through the city, turning order into chaos and prompting the authorities to round up the infected in an empty mental hospital. What could possibly go wrong? Cue pretty much every terrifying vision of martial order you can think of, as those behind the walls are left to fend for themselves, and the hospital becomes a petri dish for that human knack for binding cruelty and compassion. Staying mostly within the walls of the asylum, the story treads much less physical ground than your traditional road trip post-apocalyptic story. But Saramago draws us in by stripping paragraph breaks and quotation marks from character dialogue to create a stream of conscious style of prose that suggests the sudden disorientation of actually going blind. Here's an excerpt, quote, "Why did we become blind? I don't know. Perhaps one day we'll find out. Do you want me to tell you what I think? Yes, do. I don't think we did go blind. I think we are blind. Blind but seeing. Blind people who can see but do not see." End quote. That is it for another cover-to-cover reading list. As per usual, we're only really scratching the surface of this fascinating genre, so drop your favourite recommendations down in the comments. Otherwise, don't forget to subscribe so you get notified of our next episode. Until next time, happy reading.